All right, so we are going to just jump right in here. We're going to start an Xcode project, we're going to start a Firebase project, and then we're going to connect Firebase to our Xcode project. So this is actually super simple. You guys are going to see that in a couple seconds. There's not much code we have to write, but I am going to take a couple minutes in this video to kind of just explain at a high level again, what is Firebase, why are we using it, and what are some of the implications of using Firebase in your app. All right, welcome back everybody. It has been such a long time since I have made a video, I think 9 or 10 months now. So hopefully you guys are still here. I'm definitely going to be a little bit rusty in these first couple videos, so bear with me as I get back into the groove. But I'm super excited because Firebase is very fun to use, and I definitely enjoyed prepping for this course because there's just so much cool stuff that we can do using the Firebase SDKs that we can't or would be really difficult to do if we didn't have some sort of SDK like this. So for this video, we're going to first talk very briefly about what Firebase is, what are its capabilities. Then we're going to start up a project and connect in to Firebase. To connect in, we're going to use Swift Package Manager, which I don't think I've done on my channel before. Is basically a super convenient way to add in third-party packages to your Xcode project. Luckily, Swift Package Manager, we don't have to use the terminal anymore. We can do it straight in Xcode. Super easy. So let's get into it. Firstly, what is Google Firebase? Those of you who are not familiar, generally when someone says I'm using Firebase, that means they're using Firebase as the backend for their app. So Google Firebase is basically like a monstrous SDK that has a bunch of SDKs inside of it. So as we're going to go through in this course, all of these child SDKs have different use cases. Some are for your database, some are for analytics, Crashlytics, A/B testing, a whole bunch of different things. Someone says I'm using Firebase as my backend, it usually just means they're using the database, but it is really important to know that you can use Firebase and not use their database and use some of their other products as well. So there's a lot of apps out there that actually don't use the Firebase database, but use the other tools in Firebase, which of course we're going to learn here as well. So it's called Google Firebase, obviously because Google makes it. And that's actually an important thing to understand about Firebase. So previously on my channel, I have covered Core Data, which is a local database on the iPhone. And I've also covered CloudKit, which is a remote database on Apple's servers. Now, it's important though to note that both Core Data and CloudKit are made by Apple. So they are for iOS devices for building an iOS application. So if you're just building an iOS app and that's the entire use of your project, then that's fine. But a lot of companies also want to make an Android app or a web app or something along those lines. And so if you made an Android app, you wouldn't be able to connect it to your CloudKit database because CloudKit is specific for Apple products. The beautiful thing about Firebase is that you can connect to it from pretty much any device. It is purposely made so that iOS apps can connect to it, Android apps can connect to it, web apps can connect to it. We can get all of our apps to connect to this single source, which is extremely convenient and extremely scalable. As you're going to see later in this video, there's a whole bunch of stuff that Firebase can. They're highlighting here the build features includes Firestore, which is a fully functioning scalable database that you can connect into. There's authentication. So that's going to handle all of your sign-in methods, sign in with Apple, sign in with Google, sign in with email, everything like that. Bunch of extensions, which we'll talk about later in this course. They have crash monitoring, performance monitoring, analytics tools. There's remote config, so you can literally remotely change configurations in your app, cloud messaging, and then A/B testing, so you can basically monitor some of those remote configurations, figure out what's the best configuration for your app. We're going to cover pretty much all of this throughout this course. We're going to start with the authentication and then move to the database. Those are the two definitely most common Firebase features, and then we're going to move basically to release and monitor and then into engage. It is important to note that Firebase is free to start, which is great if you're just developing or creating a sample app like what we're going to do. But Some of their products do require you to upgrade to their paid plan, which is a pay-as-you-go plan. And then some of the products also require you to have an Apple developer account, which is not a Firebase thing. That is an Apple thing. Pretty much all of the videos in this course, though, will not require you to actually make a paid account. It is important to note, though, as we start incorporating SDKs like this into our projects, that we have to be aware of the pricing, right? So if we used CloudKit or Core Data, there's no extra charge in using that. Whereas in Firebase, we're now going to have to pay for it. So if we go to the pricing tab, it's very simple. Start with the Spark plan, which is free, and you get some limits. And then pay as you go basically gives you unlimited, basically removes the limits, and then you pay for your usage. As we get into actually using our database, we'll be able to see the actual usage for each basically child SDK. So here's the authentication package. Here's the Firestore, which is their database. So basically you can use all of these and then the pricing will aggregate together and it will charge you per month. All right, that is enough talking. Let's actually set up a project now. All right, so let's set this thing up. Before we actually set up our Firebase project, let's set up our Xcode project. So I'm going to open up Xcode real quick. I'm going to use version 14.2. They've made a bunch of updates to Xcode recently. Most of them are good. A couple of them are a little iffy, but 14.2 seems to be stable. Let's create a new Xcode project. It's going to be an app just like all of our other projects. Of course, we're going to do a bootcamp here. So it's not going to be a functioning app, but we're going to do it in an app project. Product name, I'm going to call this Swiftful Firebase Bootcamp. Call it whatever you want to call it. Put in your organization identifier. We're not going to push this to the App Store, so it doesn't really matter. Swift UI interface, language is Swift. Not going to use core data and don't need tests. Go on, click next. Save it where you need to save it. And once you're done, let's open up the Xcode project. Let's get the simulator connected here. All right, so we got our Xcode project set up now. Let's set up our Firebase project. So we're going to jump back into the internet browser. We're going to go to firebase.google.com. And I think you need to be signed into a Google account to do this. So I'm signed into mine. And let's get started. As you're going to see, their docs are awesome. So even if you didn't have me, you would be able to set this up on your own. I'm sure of it because their docs are pretty detailed for at least for the big stuff in Firebase. So we're going to create a new project here. Welcome to Firebase, create a project. Let's create a name for your project. So this is going to be the name that we use in the Firebase console. It does not have to be the exact same name as your app. The name that you're going to ship with your bundle, you're going to configure in Xcode, but this will be the name for your project and you cannot change the name once you create it. We're going to name this Swiftful Firebase Bootcamp. Of course, name it what you want. Accept the terms and continue. Later in this course, we're going to add Google Analytics. It's basically Google's analytics tool that comes baked in to Firebase. And the awesome part is that a lot of the analytics that we want to track are automatically tracked for us. So for example, first app open, when a user first opens your app, that's automatically going to be logged to Firebase. So we don't have to send those analytics ourselves. So of course, like they're recommending, we want to enable this for our project and click continue. My analytics location is going to be in the United States. This should be the location of your organization. It's not necessarily where your users are, but your organization. Let's use the default settings. Let's accept the terms. Let's create the project. Oh, great. My new project is ready. Click continue. And it's going to jump us into the Firebase console. All right, let's X out of this little pop-up here. The Firebase console can definitely be overwhelming if you've never used it before, but it's actually not that bad. So essentially the left side is our navigator, all of the different, I'm going to call them like child SDKs. So within Firebase, you get again, like the analytics tools, the database tools, and you can see all the different tools on the left column here. The primary ones are in the build section. So this is authentication. These are the databases. Storage is where you can host images and videos and things like that. We have the release and monitor section where we have our Crashlytics, our performance, a whole section for all the analytics that we're going to get into, and then engage. This is stuff that after you've created your app to optimize your app. So A/B test, in-app messaging, remote config, deep linking, adding advertisements into your app. So much cool stuff here, but we are just going to start by getting our Xcode project connected to Firebase. And then throughout this playlist, we're basically going to go through all of these major products one by one. So get started by adding your app. Let's just follow their steps. iOS app bundle ID. I'm going to go to my Xcode project. Going to go to the target. I'm going to go to signing in capabilities. I'm going to get the bundle identifier right here. Just going to copy that. Let's go back to Firebase, paste it in. App nickname. I think this is just for us. I'm not going to add a nickname. And then App Store ID. If your app's already in the App Store, you would have an App Store ID. This is basically every app in the App Store has an App Store ID. If you don't have one, you can leave this blank for now, like I'm going to do. Then you can always add these later. Let's register our app and download the config file. So I'm going to click download here. It's going to go to my downloads. So this is what the config file looks like. This is a info.plist file. So in every Xcode project, you already have a plist file. So if I go to the info tab, this is our basic info.plist that comes with our Xcode project. And what we're doing now is just adding another info.plist separate of the one in our Xcode project, but this one is specific for Firebase. And as you're going to see in here, there's just basically a bunch of IDs, basically so that the Firebase SDK knows which project is yours on the server. So I'm going to take the downloaded file and just drag and drop it into my project here. I'm just going to put it on the left and let's copy items, create groups, make sure you're adding it to the target and finish. One thing I'm going to note is that, so I've downloaded multiple projects before on this computer. And so that's why when it downloaded, it has this 1 at the end because this is the second version of this. This is the second file with the same name in my downloads folder. So if you have multiple projects, this is probably going to happen. We do need the name to be exactly Google Service-info with no extra characters. So if this is your case, make sure you edit the name here to just be Google Service-info. Great. We got this in our project. Let's go back to the documentation. Click Next. Add the Firebase SDK. I can't tell you guys how much I love Swift Package Manager compared to CocoaPods. Up to this point in my channel, I've never used a Swift Package Manager before. Basically, it's a super convenient way to get other people's third-party packages into your application. And all we need to do is get the GitHub URL and then pull it into our project. Before we do that though, I just want to show you guys that if we go to this website, this URL, we can actually see the repo for this SDK. And so any SDK that is public, you'll be able to go to the repo and you can go and you can pull in the HTTPS value right here. And if it's a Swift Package Manager, you could just copy that and then pull it into your app. So now that we have the URL, let's go back to our Xcode project. Super simple. We're going to go File, Add Package. And we're going to paste in that package. It should come right up. Now, when you pick a package, you need to decide which version of the package you want. Sometimes if it's my own projects or my own packages, I would do an exact version and check out a certain branch or a certain release. Sometimes you could do a certain branch. So here we could check out the master branch, which is the main branch. But usually when you're checking out somebody else's package, you want to keep it not on the master, but on the most recent released branch, because we don't really know what master is. It could be the release branch, but it could just be their working branch. We don't know. So we're just going to do up to major version. So keeping up to next major version, and it looks like it's 9.0.0 to less than 10.0. I'm going to quickly go to the Firebase repo here and look at the releases. And usually that up to next major version automatically puts in the most recent release. Maybe it's just not registering because this is 10.4, but let's actually maybe just use the 10.4 version for now and see how that goes. So let's check out maybe an exact version. And we'll do 10.4. We can always change the version later and update as needed. Add package. This should take a second. This is probably going to take a couple seconds because the Firebase SDK is massive and there's so many basically sub frameworks inside of it. If you're downloading your own package, it's going to be way smaller, way faster. All right, we're going to get to this screen. Within the Firebase iOS SDK is all of these products. And these products, for the most part, align with the products in our Firebase console, which I'm going to open up a new tab real quick, go back to the Firebase console. So basically all of these projects we're looking at now are all of these, right? Authentication, database, app check are the same thing as here. So analytics, app check is one. And so this is asking us which of these packages within the SDK do we want to include in our app? And we don't want to include all of them because we don't want to include the ones that we don't need, because these will add to your build times. And we generally don't want to include code that is not being used in our projects. So as we go through this course, we're going to individually add the packages in each video. So for right now, we're just going to need the ones to set up Firebase. So for right now, we just want to set up the basic ones that we need. So I'm going to look at the documentation here, and it says, choose the Firebase libraries you want to use. Make sure to add Firebase Analytics. And without IDFA, use this one. We're going to use IDFA. I think that's the more common. So let's just include the Firebase Analytics for now. Come in here, Analytic. Generally, if I see a package that also has a Swift version, I'm going to include that. That's usually just extra super Swifty convenience functions for us. So maybe there's some Swift concurrency stuff, some async await. Maybe there's some of these have a combine in them. So if you want the combine functions, but I think analytics is all we need. Yeah, let's add those. Let's add that package. You're going to see on the left side, it is now dependency of our project, the Firebase SDK. And this little spinner means that it is basically downloading all of the files. We'll give that a second. While that's happening, we're going to come back to our browser here. We did this. Xcode is resolving. Next, add initialization code. So now all we need to do is actually configure Firebase in our project. And as you're going to see, this is super, super simple. All we need to do is call Firebase app.configure. And so let's come back into our Xcode project here. We can see our package dependencies have all loaded, a bunch of stuff that probably looks unfamiliar to you, but these are just the general packages that are required within Firebase. We're going to go to our app file. This is the main app in our project. All right, just like the documentation says, we are going to import Firebase, and then we need to call configure. Now, SwiftUI apps do not have an app delegate, and for the most part, I don't want to use an app delegate. There are certain packages within Firebase that are going to require us to use the app delegate. There are certain packages within Firebase that are going to require us to use the app delegate. So I'm going to show you how to configure it with or without the app delegate. So firstly, without, super simple. Before we actually launch the window of our app, we can create an initializer for the instance of our app here, and we can just call Firebase app.configure. It's that simple. And then let's add a little printout here, configured Firebase. Let's build and run our app to a simulator just to make sure we get this printout. All right, I'm going to run my app real quick. Got my standard hello world, and I can see a bunch of stuff printing out to the console. So if you don't see all this stuff, then you did something wrong. We obviously configured Firebase, and then there's a bunch of printouts here, debug information. Our analytics are set up. Later in this course, we can enable and disable some of these logs. Firebase definitely bombards you with logs. So there's going to be a point where we want to turn these off, but we'll just leave them for now because we don't have much going on. Configured Firebase. This is how to do it without an app delegate. If we look at their docs, they're telling us to do an app delegate, which is very simple. It's literally, this is all the code. So here's an app delegate. I'm going to copy this. Let's paste it down here in our app. So this is a app delegate. So this is the app delegate. I'm going to highlight this. Control I to just clean it up. And then let's put this on one line so it looks a little bit better. And then we can just configure our app here, and it did finish launching with options. Now we just need to make sure that this app here is connected with this app delegate. If you're not familiar with an app delegate, it's probably because you are just a SwiftUI developer. In UIKit, we use the app delegate to basically host the root of our app. There's a bunch of functions that kick off when your app runs, like did finish launching. There's also functions that run when you close your app, and all of those functions are easily accessed through an app delegate. This is something I think Apple's definitely moving away from. This is why it doesn't come by default in SwiftUI apps anymore. If you make a UIKit app, the app delegate is baked into the project. So since we're doing an app delegate here, we just need to initialize it in our app, which they gave us the code for already. Just going to copy that. paste it here. And since we're going to use the delegate, we no longer need this init. So I'm just going to put my print statement down here and then cut this out. Let's run our app one more time. Now with an app delegate, configured Firebase, everything's working. I'm going to delete the print statement because we know it's working. Make sure you want to return true here. We always return true. This is just running functions before launching the window of your app. Go back to the documentation. We did this. Let's click next and we are all set. That was super, super simple. That literally, you didn't even need to be a developer to connect that. It was so easy. And let's go back to the console. Awesome. All right, that is it, guys. We are connected to Firebase. We have our project connected to the Firebase console. And the next couple of videos, we're going to start going through all of the amazing features of Firebase. And we're going to start basically the same way you would start building an app, with authentication, logging users into our app. And then we're going to move towards creating user profiles in our database and go from there. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and I will see you in the next one.